We're here in Copenhagen with Richard Dolan, and lots of interesting things are currently happening in the United States. And Richard has been investigating some of this as well. So welcome, Richard.
Hi, Robert. I'm always glad to be here with you.
Yeah, me too. Mm-hmm. So you watched the, first of all, storm on Area 51. You're already preparing on Naruto running, or?
Well, this is a really crazy thing that's happening. Somebody, apparently as a joke, at least from what I understand, came up with this idea after watching Bob Lazar and Jeremy Corbell on the Joe Rogan show. And this is how it started, I believe, and decided that he was going to initiate a run on Area 51, like a mass run. And he tossed in this phrase of Naruto running. We're going to storm Area 51 using Naruto running to evade the bullets. I had to look up what Naruto running meant. I didn't even understand. But it's like animation type of running, where you're bending down and your arms are behind you, I think. So what's crazy about this is I don't know how many million people have signed up for this now. The last time I checked, it was more than 3 million, I think. It's probably much more than that. I'm hoping that fizzles out. Because really it will be dangerous for people to try to do anything like that. That's a very inhospitable environment. And after 10 minutes of going into that desert, I think people will be regretting their decision.
Yeah.
So, hopefully they won't do that.
So they're not gonna find anything anyway.
Well, they're not going to get to the destination. That's absolutely not possible. Mm-hmm. And even if you had 500,000 people starting it, which won't happen, there won't be anything like that. They're not going to get far. There is security all over the place, and they're not going to make it. So I think call it off, and we'll try other means.
Do you think that 1.5 or 1.9 or how many million people have undersigned this would have signed or would have shown their interest in this kind of event without the unidentified series on the History Channel and Tom DeLonge and To the Stars Academy and all of this?
That's a very good question. Without a doubt, over the last 2 years, now we're in the middle of 2019 while we're shooting this, so really for the last 2 years, particularly in the United States, but I think we're seeing a ripple effect worldwide. There has been a definite transformation in how the subject of UFOs is being portrayed in the establishment media. And the way it's being portrayed is with a lot more seriousness. That's an incredible transformation. Like you, I've been following this subject for a very, very long time. And when newspapers like the New York Times are covering UFOs in a serious manner, that's a shocking transformation. Up until 2017, the New York Times was consistently dismissive of the UFO subject in its coverage. And this had been the case for more than 70 years before that. And not just the New York Times, but all of the major American establishment news sources were the same way. But what happened is that this has been changing. And since the later part of 2017, we've seen with the formation of To the Stars Academy, TTSA, led by Tom DeLonge, the singer of Blink-182, and filled out by a large cast of former, or maybe current, but certainly former government and intelligence community officials, some who have been with the CIA, some with the U.S. Defense Department, some in private industry with high-level security clearances. But it's an impressive team, and DeLonge is working with them, they're working with him, they're using him, whatever they're doing, they're promoting information on the UFO subject to the public, and they're getting that message out in a way that people are taking seriously. It was only 2 months after they announced their formation that the New York Times and Politico issued several very interesting news stories on the Pentagon and UFOs.
And it has been going on like this ever since. Even since the beginning, or shortly before this History Channel series started, there were new revelations.
Yes.
Which there was a whole bombardment of news elements, right, coming and stuff. And So
yeah, so what happened is that was 2017. All through 2018, there was a continual crescendo of UFO-related news, little things here and there coming out. But then 2019, it really increased even more. And this includes, and most of this is TTSA inspired, it seems to me, or TTSA driven. This includes an announcement by the United States Navy that they are upgrading their reporting system on UAP, or UFOs. And they made this announcement in April of 2019 that their pilots have been encountering objects that they don't really quite understand what these objects are. So there's that. At the same time, there was additional news coverage, the Pentagon making a formal admission that, yes, they were quite recently investigating UFOs. Despite the New York Times article previously, the Pentagon hadn't yet issued a formal statement, but they did in the spring of 2019. And then you get this very rapid succession of news stories. The New York Times on May 26th, 2019, had another major UFO story. And I think in a lot of ways it was even bigger than the first one. And in this second story, they described tremendously interesting sightings by the United States Navy off the eastern coast of the U.S. from Virginia going down to Florida, connected with a battle group led by the USS Roosevelt. And what they described were over a 9-month period, 2014 to 2015, quite recently, really, U.S. Navy pilots encountering objects that, again, had extraordinary capabilities that we don't understand and were violating what you could say sensitive airspace. That is Navy training exercises, where you're not supposed to have unknown objects hanging around, where FA-18 Super Hornet pilots are testing their maneuvers. And yet these types of things happen. One of the cases they described was you have two fighter jets flying in tandem about 30 meters apart. And an object, a square or cubed object, flies between them. It's a cube, but apparently with a sphere in the center, according to one of the Navy pilots. So what's interesting isn't that these reports are happening, because we've had these types of reports for generations. But what is interesting is that the New York Times reported it. So it gets a great amount of coverage. At the same time that came out, within days, we see the rollout of the television show Unidentified on the History Channel. And this is also by TTSA. And you can, it seems to me that there's a coordination of the news coverage with this television show. And I think the TTSA people certainly have very good relationships with the establishment media in the United States.
I mean, this is a professionally orchestrated media campaign, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So people are wondering, is this an intelligence operation?
Yeah, many people ask this question: Is TTSA a CIA operation or some other intelligence operation? And I think it's fair to keep that as a consideration, particularly when you see the very close coordination they have with the New York Times and other major media. So I do consider this as a possibility. It's not my leading hypothesis, but if it is a possibility, then we might ask ourselves, what is the purpose of this? Is it to provide a genuine, at least partial disclosure of the UFO subject to the rest of the world? Or is it something for more nefarious purposes? So there's a debate about this. But I actually don't believe that this is an intelligence community operation per se. What I believe currently is that this is the result of a faction. So I think that TTSA represents a faction within the national security community and also the private contractor community. I think there are factions that want a disclosure, at least partially, for certain reasons. And one reason could very well be to obtain open access to some of the exotic technologies believed to exist in the classified world. So if you have an acknowledgement of this UFO reality and of certain exotic materials, conceivably it would allow competitors to have access to some of that material. There could be a lot of money, or it could allow the company that owns this material to utilize it in a much more open manner and make a lot of money off of it. So there's a lot of possibilities that are behind the scenes as to why this is happening. But I think TTSA is a faction, and it's come to me from other sources that there are people within the Pentagon who strongly oppose what TTSA is doing. So it's not all an unimpeded rollout from above. I think that they're walking a very treacherous path. They've got hostility from within the Pentagon and the intelligence community, at least in part. They have hostility from the academic scientific world, which wants nothing to do with this subject. And they have major indifference historically from the world media. So they're really engaged in almost a rebranding of UFOs to almost as if to start over, portray this phenomenon in a new light to get attention from the rest of the world. I think that's what they're doing.
Now, more or less simultaneously, there's another development coming to the attention of the public, and that is a piece of paper, a memo on a conversation that was held between some very high-ranking admiral in the Pentagon and a scientist.
Yes.
And what is so exciting about this document?
Yeah. This is a document I call the Wilson Memo. It's gone by other names. Someone has called it the Core Secrets document. It's something that I've known about since 2006 and have talked about over the years from time to time, but I never had the document to prove what I was talking about until this spring when that document leaked. And so the backstory is basically this. In April 1997, UFO researcher Dr. Stephen Greer, accompanied by astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell of Apollo 14, and a few other individuals, were able successfully to have a meeting with the Deputy Chief of Intelligence of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States. It's an important position, and the man who held that position was an admiral named Thomas R. Wilson. Wilson soon after that became Chief of Intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and then became director of a very important intelligence agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency. So in 1997, they're meeting with Wilson, and Greer seems to have been doing the presentation here, and he talks about the argument for deeply classified programs that were studying extraterrestrial technology. And from what we're able to gather in this meeting, making the argument that the United States government needs to get control of it because these programs are being operated almost in a rogue fashion by private contractors beyond U.S. government authority. And as far as I understand, this is what Dr. Greer was saying. What we are very confident about is that once that briefing or that meeting ended, Admiral Wilson did, in fact, search through the Pentagon records system to try to find this program. And after about a month and a half, he did find it. Based on the advice of some very high-ranking people within the Pentagon, he found a deeply hidden program, deeply within the classified world, programs nested within programs and so forth. A program that seemed to be possibly the kind of thing that Greer was describing. He made some phone calls, spoke to the program manager, spoke to the corporate attorney, spoke to the security manager of the program. These are not U.S. government people. This is all from the private contractor. Was finally able to get a meeting with them. And they denied him access to the program. Even though by law, he should have been able to have regulatory oversight, but they gave him none. And indeed, they confirmed to him that this was a program to study and reverse engineer non-human extraterrestrial technology. That much they confirmed to him. They said a few other things, that their progress on understanding this technology was painfully slow, that they had not made as much progress as they had wanted, and so on. But basically, Wilson was denied access. And what happened is that 5 years later, in 2002, a scientist by the name of Dr. Eric Davis was able to have a meeting with Wilson. And they met in Wilson's vehicle for a little over an hour. And Wilson explained all of this to Davis. Davis took very detailed notes, which he then distributed to a few of his close colleagues, all of whom were associated with Robert Bigelow's National Institute for Discovery Science.
So you think Eric Davis was actually sent by Bob Bigelow?
Well, this is a theory, and I think it's probably true, yeah. I think Davis was very likely going on a mission for his colleagues and for Bigelow to get this information confirmed. One of the people closely connected to Bigelow back then was Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut. And he, of course, had been at the original meeting with Stephen Greer. So this is what happened. Back in 2006, one person associated with that group showed me 2 pages of those notes. And in fact, it was the pages really describing Wilson's reaction at learning this was extraterrestrial technology, not made by human hands, was what he said. I've never forgotten reading that. But yeah, I think what we can say here is that Davis wrote these notes. They were distributed among a small group of people. What happened is that Edgar Mitchell died in January 2017. And it has become known to me through the whole leak process. I've been in touch with the source that is second in line in the chain of custody. I don't know the person who has these documents now, but I have learned that when Mitchell died, some of his papers associated with NIDS, National Institute of Discovery Science, were allowed to be taken privately, and that is what has happened. So his Apollo papers, that's all different, his astronaut papers, but his papers with Robert Bigelow and NIDS were legally and with full knowledge of the Mitchell family allowed to be taken out. And that's what we're seeing now. So these papers have now been leaking.
So, I see a certain order or a certain escalation there. Like at first you have the admission that there has been this UFO project in the Pentagon, then you have all these revelations about the Tic Tac incident and the other one. And now there's this Wilson memo coming from elsewhere, not connected to the Stars Academy, but still somehow it makes sense that it comes out right now, right? And then you have the storm on Area 51, which, I mean, if people suspect there's alien technology hidden there, then that's certainly also because of the Wilson memo, right? Because of the whole conversation about that hidden alien technology and
Well, that's a good question. It's not clear to me how much the discussion of the Wilson memo has yet leaked out to the rest of the world. But I will say this, it is an inevitability that that document, that 15-page series of notes, will make its way out into the rest of the world. It's too important not to. It's a real document. There are a few people who have argued this is some kind of hoax. That is nonsense. And anyone who reads it will understand exactly how real this is. So it's an inevitability that this conversation will go out. But I'm not aware of the Area 51 fun run group, as I call them. I don't think they're talking about this Wilson memo yet. No,
they're talking. I think the founder of that thing, he founded that because he saw the Joe Rogan interview with Bob Lazar.
Yeah.
But that also is, he's also coming out of the woods after so many years now. So
yes.
So my question, where is this all eventually going to lead us?
I think what's happening is that time is speeding up, in a sense. 10 years ago, I wrote a book called AD After Disclosure. And my co-author and I really tried to ask ourselves, how might UFO secrecy ever end? And if it ended, what would happen next? And that was the theme of our book. And one of the things that I've always thought about is, the technological infrastructure of our society is going through such an unbelievable revolution, of course, and the way that we communicate with each other, the speed with which we communicate, and the amount of data that is being uploaded all the time, every day on the web. So things are transforming really fast. We're in the midst of this societal and civilization transformation. So things are speeding up. We're now at a point where, once upon a time, it was only the United States and Russia that had a space program. But now we're in an era where many nations and many corporations are developing a space program. We're moving out off of the planet in a lot of important ways. Our computer intelligence, our artificial intelligence is going to get to a point, according to experts, where it may equal or surpass our own intelligence in the near future. All of these things are happening. And so in that kind of a world, I ask myself, can something like a UFO secret keep going forever? And I just think the answer has to be no. So I think in the large scale, we're seeing societal pressures that are increasingly forcing this situation out. One person described it to me as more toothpaste going out of the tube. And I think I like that vision, because once toothpaste is out of the tube, it can't go back in. And we're seeing now a speeding up of information, more and more that's coming out. It's not inevitable that it will end the secrecy. There are possibilities that might stop this process. But I think that there's a real possibility to think this is going to keep going for a while. And where it will end, the question that I'm asking myself is, when will that lead to an avalanche? We're having drop of information. But will it get to a point where it will actually cause an uncontrolled avalanche of information?
Now, Donald Trump announced the creation of a space force, and the French president Emmanuel Macron did the same.
Yes.
Macron even wants his space force out in space before the Americans. So UFOs, doesn't it come in quite handy, to have some kind of a threat scenario in order to have that justification to put weapons in space?
Oh, so you're asking if UFOs would be used as a justification for a space force? I see.
Or as some kind of a means to justify the creation and also the putting weapons in space. Yeah,
that's a good question, and I suppose that would be a possibility. To justify that type of a situation. I've always felt that type of a strategy is a very dangerous gamble, because acknowledging the reality of UFOs means acknowledging the reality of a cover-up for a very long time. And I've always believed that that's a greater danger than any other benefit that they might get from it. But I don't know if that's true anymore. We're now in an era where we're seeing a real purge of information on Google, on YouTube, on Facebook, a consolidation of really corporate control over those platforms. So it is actually increasingly possible that a disclosure of UFOs could be done in such a way as to really contain the narrative effectively enough to push out alternate voices like ours, like mine, like yours, in order to manipulate the public and to do it in a way to justify more spending on things like that. But I don't know. That's one possibility. I think it's probably an inevitability that the UFO secret will have to end. And therefore, it's likely that powerful forces would want to control how that secret comes out and to maximize their own benefit. And so what you're asking, I think, is a good question, and we need to keep our eyes open for that sort of thing.
And wasn't it the Robertson panel in 1952 that concluded that UFOs could be used as a psychological warfare in psychological warfare operations against the US or in favor of the US against another country?
Well, this was a long-standing concern of the U.S. intelligence community through the 1950s, and including the Robertson panel.
Do you think that would have changed nowadays?
No, there's always going to be a defense intelligence emphasis on defending national security against this type of thing you're describing. So the use of UFOs against a population psychologically, that's always going to be a possibility. But the thing is, when you look at the history of declassified military documents, we know pretty certainly that the military is genuinely concerned about real UFOs. So not just as a psychological operation. There are way too many declassified military reports, intelligence community reports that we have that prove, they don't hint, they don't suggest, they prove that the United States military has been deeply worried at times about these UFOs. And this applies to other nations as well, from what we've been able to learn.
Okay, so last question. Where is this all going to end? What is going to happen?
We're living in a very, very fast-paced era now. I gave a lecture the other day in Copenhagen here, and I suspected that by the time that lecture ever makes it out to YouTube, if it's a month or two, it may already be out of date.
Yeah.
That's how fast things are going. Here we are in the middle of the summer of 2019. And I really wonder where we're going to be sitting, or where we will be in the subject by the end of this year, and what more will be out or released, where our public conversation will be. I don't think that we're going to have a genuine disclosure. Certainly we will not have a full and complete disclosure of the UFO subject. I don't think so. But we may get closer and closer to an actual admission or an acknowledgement, even by a major government, for all we know, that there's a phenomenon occurring that we can't explain, and it's actually genuinely real. Like that's a real possibility now. That's still a long way off from acknowledging 70 plus years of a cover-up, but it's a major step. And again, the question is, when you make that step, it's not a very far step to ask a lot of other questions. I mean, once a major government, like the United States, let's just say, maybe it could happen, acknowledges that there are these objects that we don't understand, it's the tiniest step to ask, well, what about 50 years ago? Because you had the exact same reports going on then. And what about all the rumors now of cover-up and, my goodness, crash retrievals of technology? This is coming up. And that's only the beginning. So they're trying to control this disclosure. But the UFO subject is not easy to control. It's a wild phenomenon. And in my opinion, it's not controlled by us. So there's another intelligence or intelligences that is behind this. And it seems to me that we're on a verge of moving into a new phase of our civilization in many ways. And the UFO subject is part of that new civilization.
If not key to that civilization.
It may be. So it's exciting. But I don't expect things to be easy. I think we're going to have a difficult transition. Big changes are always going to be hard and not always fun. And we may not get all the answers we want anyway. I suspect that the more information comes out, it's possible that the deeper some of the arguments become for a long time anyway. I'm not expecting that we're going to solve all elements of this riddle, but I think we're moving ahead. And for my part, I'll say that I'm excited about it, and I'm glad that this is happening. I'm glad that the public conversation's moving in the direction it's moving. We've needed this for a long, long time.
Yeah. So this is the most important development that came up for the last 20 or 30 years. Do you agree?
Yes, I do agree. I think this is very important. And again, there are critics of what's happening, and they think this is a deception or a disinformation. I would say they're right and they're wrong. It's a little bit of both. I think it would be impossible, probably, to go from years and decades of complete silence and no information to go from that overnight to complete openness and truth. I don't think that's possible. So I think you're looking at stages of releasing information in a very careful way. That's what it looks like. The main thing is we have to make sure that process doesn't stop, that it continues, so that we really are able to get a full public conversation going.
So many surprises awaiting us.
I believe so.
Okay.
And in fact, private researchers like myself and other colleagues of mine in North America and as well as in Europe, but particularly some of the colleagues I'm thinking of, are working on new revelations and new information. It's not all TTSA. There's a lot of others, rest of us, who are also working on good journalism and getting some important information out. So we'll see how that goes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm already thrilled to see that. So thank you very much, Richard, for your time.
Robert, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.